Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com again, and as per usual I have an array of decks in front of us to help illustrate the points that I'll be making in this video, which today is to focus on the Flemish or Belgian tarot decks. Now I know that I have 3 decks from Paris. I have the Noblet, I have the Vieville, which, you know, I believe in error identified it as a Swiss tarot, but of course it's not. I knew better, but it was just a slip of the tongue. It was created in Paris around the same period of time as the Noblet was, and it seemed to have had an influence on the direction that the Flemish tarot decks went. So that's why I'm including this. I'm including the Noblet, or the Noblet, because it was fashioned more, although it was created in Paris, fashioned more in the style we're accustomed to seeing of Marseille. So it seems as though these 2 French decks kind of went in another direction, in different directions. The Tarot of Paris I'm putting in for good measure because it was also created in around the same period of time as these 2 other decks. I don't have a definitive deck, a date for the Tarot of Adam C. de Hautot, but you know, the dates that I got out of the Kaplan Encyclopedia Volume 2 kind of dated between 1723 and 1748, and then the last deck that I have on display here is the Vandenborre, which I believe was 1775. So I really only have 2 examples of Flemish tarot decks, which are these last 2. These others are the ones that may have or may not have influenced the direction that these decks took. Now, as always, when studying tarot history or the decks and understanding, you know, the influences, it's always helpful to look at the map. I call this my tarot map, but it isn't, you know, that per se, but that's what I call it. Okay, so we have Italy, who, as of now, scholars believe that the game of tarot was developed in Italy, right? We have Switzerland, which is nestled in between, you know, Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. And then way up here, nestled against Germany and France, we have Belgium, which is the focus of today's video. Now, as the crow flies, Brussels is maybe, you know, under 200 miles or 150 miles north of Paris. And I guess Paris or Rouen would have been the most influential cities, French cities, regarding Belgium and, you know, the development of tarot there. Okay, so let's take a look at these cards. Now, it should be noted that the Flemish decks do number the Fool, and they number the Fool as 22. Now, this may have been to satisfy a version of the game that they came up with, where the card is labeled 22, or that is the value of that card. But it seems as though in the other decks, that the Fool traditionally is not numbered, right? We have no number on the Noblet, we have no number on the Vieville, and we have no number on the Tarot of Paris in the number spot, right? Now, it's interesting to look at the directions that these individuals are walking. And I'm going to pull, for the sake of convenience, I'm going to put the Fool of the Flemish decks in front. Now we'll notice that in the Vieville and the 2 Flemish decks, the Fool is walking in the same direction, as is the Tarot of Paris, right? They're all walking toward the left. But in the Noblet, which we think of probably as the most, you know, consistent precursor to the TDM, if not, you know, the father. We don't know if there's any older TDM style than this. but this seems to be it. We notice that he's walking in that direction. Now, it's been observed by others much more astute than I, that the Vieville, and we'll see this in a few examples, they have actually been copied from the negative rather than the positive of a prior deck, meaning that, for example, and I don't think they use this deck as their example, but just say, for example, they used this deck, they would have copied onto their wood print, their wood block, this image rather than, which is the finished product, rather than the negative, right? So that when it was printed in reversed. And we see a couple, we see that maybe in a few of the cards, like the Hermit going in a different direction than we're accustomed to seeing. We see it in the inversion of the Hanged Man. We see it in the words on the Temperance card, Sol Fama. Clearly that is written in reverse. So clearly the image was copied from something that would have been properly written, right? So we clearly have an inversion there. And so these images of the Vieville were probably inverted, right? From a final product that they were using as their source. And then, of course, when they were printed in reversed. And we see that in the Flemish decks, right? There's a consistency. Well, we'll talk about the Spanish captain and the Bacchus characters. But, there's a sense that the Vieville probably was a prototype to the Flemish decks because they seem to have more in common with the Flemish decks than they do with the Tarot de Marseille. Okay, I've already spoken too much without showing you the cards. Okay, so quickly from left to right, in case I tend to forget, the Noblet. This one is by Flournoy. I do have a facsimile deck, but the Flournoy, I think, tends to photograph better, so I'm using it in the video. Same with the Vieville. I have a facsimile deck by Civilixi, but I'm using the Flournoy as my deck to video because it videos better, it photographs better. But we can refer to the Vieville facsimile deck if we need to. I have it handy. Okay, then we have the Paris, the Tarot of Paris. Again, I have a facsimile deck down here, but I'm using this particular one by the International Museum of Tarot of Italy because it's larger and it's the restoration. It makes the images a lot more clear to see. And then we have the beautiful deck by Adam C. de Hautot, recreated or republished by Tarot Sheet Revival, Sullivan Hismans. And then the Vandenborre Tarot of 1775. This copy I have, I believe, published by U.S. Game Systems, Inc. and printed in Belgium. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Fool cards. So we have the Fool of the Noblet, in keeping with what we're accustomed to seeing with the, other typical Marseille style. We do have the genitalia here, which we don't see, in other decks. So it's one of its idiosyncrasies, but in general, it is what we're accustomed to seeing. In the Vieville, perhaps because it was copied from a final print rather than a wood block, it's a wood block. We have the Fool walking in the other direction. We do have a creature jumping toward the hind end of the walker, and he does have the usual things. Now, whether or not the hat of the Fool with the bells was misunderstood and made into ears, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where the iconography, varies. We do have at the end of this hobo stick, we do have, you know, the face, which doesn't appear on the Noblet, nor does it appear to, well, there is a face that appears here on the walking stick. So and that's interesting. They got the ingredients, they just didn't, you know, not necessarily in the same spot. The Tarot of Paris, which is also probably contemporary with these other two decks. These three decks, you know, pretty much in keeping around the same period of time. We have the Fool with his image on his staff, right? Which it appears here in this case and appears on his walking stick here. And kind of like a court gesture reminiscent of that. And then here, again, he's walking in the same direction as the Vieville, as he does in the Vandenborre. And the face does appear here. That does appear to be a face, but it's all but forgotten in the Vandenborre by 1775. Okay, Le Bateleur, we have a figure standing in front of a table. Probably, you know, he's out of doors, perhaps a street performer, a con artist, you know, one of those kind of guys who who try to outwit you with their ball and cup routine. He also appears to have dice, okay, and a few other instruments, very similar to the Vieville. Again, notice though that the Vieville is facing in the other direction. Something similar happening in the Tarot of Paris. The Tarot of Paris seems to have developed independently. You know, maybe they all did. It's not maybe fair of me to say that exactly, but the reason I included the Tarot of Paris is because they share the same border, you know, with the Adam C. de Hautot, which I think is interesting. So I think it's not, I think it was something that I had to comment on and show. Their backs are quite different. This back is not authentic. Again, the Bateleur of the Flemish decks is in keeping with the posture of the Vieville, right? And not the Noblet. But his objects remain pretty much the same. Oh, wait, we have the female Pope. Now, you know, I'm not sure that that's a triple tier. It could have been that it was that the third tier was sacrificed for the number 2. I don't know. But the Vieville has the triple tier. Again, she's looking in the opposite direction. The Vieville seems consistent to be postured in the opposite direction of other decks. We have what appears to be a triple tier crown in the Tarot of Paris. And then, of course, the Belgian, as did the Swiss deck, substituted the number 2 and 5 cards. The Swiss substituted them with Juno and Jupiter, and the Flemish decks substituted the number 2 of the female Pope with the Spanish captain, who is a character who thinks very highly of himself, but most definitely a theatrical reference. In fact, you know, who knows how many of the images in the deck of tarot really reference, you know, theatrical or, you know, stories or stories from other sources, right? You know, none of us were there. We can surmise, you know, from the best of our ability looking backward in time and guessing, right? But none of us were there, so who really knows? All the sources. Okay, we have the Empress. She looks head on. So as there was not a lot to to copy her posture incorrectly, right? She was looking head on. So the Vieville also has her looking head on, but with her accoutrements in the opposite hands, right? Now, ironically, a staff would be held in the right hand by a royal figure. However, when it comes to the holding of the shield, most of them, will go on a limb and say most people were right-handed. So the shield probably would have been held by the left hand accurately, so that the sword, which would have gone through the bouche, that's what this shape is, that negative shape is a bouche. I don't see it on here, but here it is. Or it's a bouche or boucher, I'm not sure how it's pronounced in French. But, if you're holding your shield with your left hand, you would have had your bouche, your sword going, which would have been your dominant hand, rested in that spot. So it might have been a happy accident that in this particular deck that the shield is held in the left and that the staff is in the right. In both, she's, it's ambiguous, is that the back of a chair or are those wings? And in this one, if they are wings or the backs of a chair, they're not the same. They're not consistent with each other. We have the Empress, quite a different image. And again, as in the Vieville, which does seem to be the prototype, right? We have this same anomaly with the back of the chair or the wing, right? Same kind of anomaly. And that the accoutrements are held in hands different than in the Noblet. Now we have the Emperor facing in this direction. But it seems that the Vieville has the Emperor facing in the direction that we most frequently tend to see the Emperor facing in TDM decks. I'm going to pause right now and pull another TDM deck just to make sure that I'm not speaking like an idiot and that I know what I'm talking about. But it seems to me that this is the direction that most TDM emperors do face. So give me a second. Okay, so I pulled the Nicholas Conver deck. This one is from the folks over at Artisan Tarot. The deck is available over at their website, www.artisantarot.com. In any event, you can see that I wasn't hallucinating in my memory. That by the time of the Converse, 1760, we have the image of the Emperor facing in this direction towards the left. So it differs from the Noblet, which goes in the opposite direction. So, is it possible that, some of these decks that came afterwards were, not following, if they followed the example in the Noblet, then that they also were copying from reversals or something, I'm not really sure how it happened or how to explain it, but it does seem uncanny that consistently the Emperor is facing in another direction. Now here, although it's quite a different image for the Emperor, he is facing in the same direction as the Noblet. However, in the Flemish tarot decks, it is in keeping with the Vieville. And it is a reversal because, it is a reversal of the Noblet. However, you do notice that he's holding his scepter in the correct hand, because an emperor would hold his scepter in his right hand. So either it's a happy accident, I don't know. Okay, we have the Pope. Here he does have the triple crown. He has the sign of the stigmata on his, what would be his right hand. He's holding the staff in his left. And there are two tonsured individuals before him, tonsured referencing the hairstyle. And, you know, one of the individuals has the hat of either a cardinal or a pilgrim. So they're either, you know, they're definitely devoted individuals, you know, people who have devoted their life to Christ and the church, but it's unclear whether they're pilgrims making a pilgrimage to see the Pope or if they are cardinals seeking an audience with the Pope. And we have in the Vieville, he's kind of looking in the same direction. So maybe they weren't using the, you know, I don't know what the source was for the Vieville. I don't know. Here, they're not tonsured individuals. They have full heads of hair, and they both have the pilgrim hats or the cardinal hats. So these two fellas look like they might have been pilgrims, whereas maybe these guys were cardinals, because I think cardinals would have had tonsured hair. There's no sign of the stigmata on the hands or the gloved hands, which is interesting. And then, of course, in the Flemish decks, we have no reference to the papacy whatsoever. In fact, we have kind of like an anti-papacy card, right? We have Bacchus straddling a barrel of alcoholic beverage. Okay, for the Lover. Because this would be considered TDM1, we have a blindfolded Cupid, the three individuals, the gentleman in the center. Not clear if these women represent vice or virtue, or if one is the celebrant who is officiating the services. I don't know. Interestingly, the Vieville, Cupid is not blindfolded. And again, we have three characters. We have three individuals. The Tarot of Paris goes in a completely different direction, a non-blindfolded Cupid with a couple engaged in, I'm not exactly sure what activity. And then in the Flemish, we have the non-blindfolded Cupid with the individuals facing or seeming to face in the same direction as the Vieville, with the third party being on the far right, whereas the third party in the Noblet appears to be on the far left and is blindfolded. So it really seems that the Flemish decks really kind of are in keeping, you know, are pretty consistent with what we see in the Vieville. Okay, in both the Vieville, the Noblet and the Vieville, we see a scalloped canopy on the chariot, which, you know, is an indicator that it was familiar with the TDM1 style. And by the time, well, this one is unusual, the Tarot of Paris, because there's no canopy and the chariot is run by geese. But by the time we get to the Flemish, we have one horse rather than two. It deviates even from the Vieville, right? And there's no canopied chariot at all. So we have one horse, and the charioteer or the chariot is heading towards the left, whereas in the Vieville it departs from the Vieville. So, I mean, tarot is gosh, it's so full of mystery, really. I mean, it's impossible probably to really fully describe, who influenced who. I mean, Belgium would have been more greatly influenced by what was coming out of Rouen or Paris, right, as opposed to any of the other countries. But okay, so here we have the figure of justice. Appears to be winged, although it could be ambiguously the back of a chair. And the Vieville, or the Vieville, please, I try, but my, pronunciation is horrendous. We do have, it's kind of like in the same with the justice backs, right? With the empress backs, right? Like an anomaly with how they're drawn. They're not symmetrical here. Also in the Vieville, the arms are, although she's looking forward, just like in the Empress, so there's no switching the direction of how she looked if they copied it backwards. But here she's in the Vieville, she's holding her sword in her left hand, and the scales of justice in her right. And in the Noblet or the Noblet, she's holding them in the opposite hands. In both cases, the scale of justice seems to be askew. They don't seem to be parallel. I discussed this in the previous video, that this face of justice here is a double-faced. Definitely the scales of justice are askew, and the faces, both of them, are blindfolded. And the sword. And here, and we'll take it and look back at the Vieville. The Vieville. In the Adam C. de Hautot, they look like they're wings. Again, holding the accoutrements of justice in the same hands as in the Vieville. But there's kind of an ambiguity here. What's going on with those images in the back? So the Adam C. Hautot really makes the departure and just decides that those are wings. Because after all, justice is a virtue, so it makes sense that justice would have wings. And if the Noblet was copied from something, it's possible that they got it wrong, right? Or they misunderstood. There's nothing of the TDM or Tarot of Marseille persuasion that predates the Noblet, right? As far as we know, but none of them exist, in other words, but that doesn't mean there wasn't one that existed and that the Noblet was copied from it, right? We don't know these things. These are things that we don't know. Okay, we have the Hermit in the Noblet, which is the earliest example of TDM that we know of. He's facing in one direction. In the Vieville, he's facing the opposite. Here he's numbered 9, but it makes sense that if he was copied, if the Vieville copied it from a negative rather than if it was copied from a positive rather than a negative, then that it makes sense that the number would have been transposed. These are both, IX would have been a way to write 9, as was four ones following a V. They're just different ways of writing Roman numeral letters. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, this was 1X, so this would have been 9. Stepping in the same direction as the Noblet Hermit. And in keeping with the Vieville, again, we have the Flemish decks who do identify it as number 9. And here as number 9. going in the same direction as the Vieville. I think I'm going to remove the Tarot of Paris from this equation to make this more concise. And because it seems to be, it seems to do its own thing, I'm not going to include it. Maybe I'll make this video shorter. Okay, so moving on to the Wheel of Fortune. We see Fortuna in the Noblet facing toward the left. Here she's facing toward the right. But she's not facing toward the right in the Hautot. But she is facing toward the right in the Vandenborre. Interesting. Very interesting. Fortitude. 11. By this 1650-ish date, we have a woman either holding open or trying to close or, you know, doing something in the mouth of a beast. In the Vieville, it's in the opposite direction. They don't really seem to be, you know, it doesn't seem to be a copy of this, you know, this seems to be a more masculine creature, not even, you know, a gentleman, not a woman. And by the time we get to the Flemish, they are facing in the same direction as the Vieville, which is opposite of the Noblet. This is where life gets kind of interesting. In the French TDM of Noblet, or Noblet, we have the hanged man identified as the hanged one. Number 12 is where custom, hanging by one foot. He does have these peculiar things hanging from the shoulders, but that's a video for another day. When we get to the Vieville, the number is consistent, but the image, either by error or, you know, mistake, is inverted. So the image is upright, as he is in the Flemish decks. Now you'll notice that in the Vandenborre, the word is broken up, you know, by someone who apparently didn't know what the word meant, maybe. Rather than being copied like faithfully, like Les Pendus. If they knew French, they would know that that was, you know, the hanged one. But something happens in the translation, right? So we know that that is like a misunderstanding of the word. And in order for the number to be correct, we ended up with a card that's upside down. Now, a lot of biz has been made of it. You know, the occultists, you know, decided that the appearance of the hanged man upright is accurate. In fact, Atea, you know, recreated this card as Prudence, identifying the hanging piece as being a snake. But here in the Hautot, he's hanging from the head, which is interesting. So it seems like they understood this was a hanged individual, but they have him hanging from the head rather than inverted, right? And maybe the person who did this card understood what that meant in French and decided, oh, this is a hanged individual. And they hung him, I don't know, from the head. Doesn't seem to be anything around his neck. Interestingly, though, you know, the Vieville fingers, or whatever those are, did carry through to the Flemish decks. Interesting. Here, they're not as finger-like, although we see what looks like a thumb there. Yeah, it does It does seem consistent to be a hand. So in the, the Vieville and then the Flemish decks seem to register these things behind the hanged figure as hands. But his hands, if his hands are behind his back, the way it looks like they are here, they would be kind of behind him, like mid-back. So this is just a peculiar way of putting the hands. But at any rate, I'm going to go out on a limb and say they did it upside down. Either not on, well, this one, I think they recognized it as a hanged individual because they do appear to have him suspended from the head. But I don't know. I think this one clearly, they just didn't know what this word meant and they didn't know what it was and they just did it wrong. But please don't send me hate mail. It's just my opinion. Okay, the death card. Now, interestingly, in the Noblet, they identify it with a name, which we don't typically see, the death card, right? And in the Vieville, notice in the Vieville that he is going in the same direction as the Noblet. He has no name. And consistently, the Flemish decks follow in the same direction as the Vieville. And they both have the name, although the Vieville does not, which is very interesting. Okay, now, Temperance. In the Noblet, we have the angel figure transferring water, what appears to be water, to another jug, right? Now, when the card Temperance was named, it, Temperance had the same meaning as it does now, pretty much the modification of, or the modification of alcohol, diluting it with water, modifying the effects of alcohol. Bear in mind what comes after Temperance. 14 is 15, which is the devil, which is what happens when you don't when you don't take heed to keep your virtues in check, or your vices rather in check, right? But what's interesting is in the Vieville, we have quite a different figure, right? We have a woman standing. Again, it looks like it was copied in reverse because these words, sol fama, sun fame, fame of the sun, I don't know. I don't know what context it would have meant, but clearly it would have been printed in the other way. And they copied it. They must have, like this person, like just like with the figure of the hanged one, seemed to understand the language, or understand what they were looking at, like right with Pendu. They knew it was a hanged person, so we have that hanged thing up top, even though he appears to be inverted. And here, it seems like they understood that this was in reverse, and so they fixed it. But she still is in keeping in general with the Vieville. As is the Vandenborre. Colors are different. Okay, in all four of these, we have a devil with, a face in the gut. In the TDM precursor, we clearly have the images of two individuals tethered to this central figure. But in the Belgian and the Vieville, which seems to be the precursor, as I've mentioned, they're all going in this, they're all decidedly going towards the left, and they very much have the same features. They have the wings, maybe referencing a fallen angel. He's spitting or spewing fire. And, he's got the claws of a beast. He's very much in keeping the same kind of figure, with faces on the kneecaps and the gut or groin area. And this one, he's got eyes and body parts, facial things all over his body, right? It could have been a reference to, mythical creatures of antiquity, It could have been some kind of image that was made popular by, a zealous priest who told a story. I don't know. Not sure where all the iconography comes from. Okay, again, now, in the higher trump cards, there's deviation from TDM, which makes us think, makes me think, that, the TDM went in this direction, right? If we pull the convert from 1760, we'll see that, again, we are in keeping, with the devil is more reminiscent of the Noblet here, and the tower is more in keeping with the Noblet, or the Noblet, right? But when we get to the Flemish cards, or the Vieville, we have something completely different. We have a shepherd. I don't see lightning being struck, but by the time we get to the Flemish cards, it's identified with a word, which I think means thunderbolt, right? So although there's no thunderbolt in the image, it is identified by word. So I guess it could be understood that there is a thunderbolt. Maybe these little things, these little sparks, could have been representing sparks from heaven. I don't know. In all three, they appear to be a shepherd with his flock under a tree. So maybe there's a storm or a thunderstorm. Again, the thunderbolt. And here it does strike the tree. It does strike the tree, or it does appear to strike. So considering that the next card is the star card, it could be biblical reference to, the shepherds being made aware that, maybe Christ was born, something like that, because the next card would be the star card. Or it could, just be, a reference to lightning striking a tree. And, just taking on a completely different image than the TDM. Let me pause. I have notes on this. Let me look and see what I wrote. No, my notes didn't say anything different than what I already said. Okay, so now we're moving on to the star card. Now, with the Noblet, we have the star as, Aquarius, the water bearer, as in the constellation Aquarius. And I've discussed this in other videos, where when the constellation Aquarius appeared in the sky in the Far East, that was when the waters came, the rain came, and that was when they irrigated their land, right? That's how I get the interpretation of the star card, as an opportunity is presenting itself and to take advantage of it. But, it could be that when the star card was being created by the Vieville, they were more, they knew that there was the card was the star card, but they chose to identify it with something else, with an astronomer, with his, tools. Certainly you would use an hourglass in the evening because there's no sun, and then the calipers or the measuring whatever, a learned individual. And, in the case of Hautot, Adam C. de Hautot, we have a star card with the same figures, right? The same, clearly based on, they're clearly based on, this one is clearly based on this one. And then with the Vandenborre, same. So it's the concept of the star and the Vieville and the Flemish went in one direction, right? With how they presented the star. And the Noblet represented it more in keeping with, the image of the constellation Aquarius, for whatever reasons. Obviously, the Noblet style, or the TDM style, became the predominant style, right? And that's what's been handed down to us when we think of TDM. These other decks, with their variations in the cards, took a different route, you know, and maybe they weren't as popular, or they didn't catch on, or maybe they just didn't reach as big an audience. Like, you know, bear in mind that, you know, Brussels is smaller, you know, and you know, France with all their, you know, card making, you know, Belgium had Brussels, right? But you know, but France had Paris, it had Rouen, it had Marseille, of course, you know, it had Lyons or Lyon, right? So there were other publishing houses in France, and, you know, their style, even though Vieville could be said to be a French style, as could the Tarot of Paris. Let's see what they're... Okay, the Tarot of Paris, interestingly, also has the astronomer with his instruments. So in France, there was this, you know, as evidenced in the Tarot of Paris, and then the Tarot of Vieville, right? So this image was in France. It's just that for whatever reasons, the TDM is the deck, or is the style that became the most popular. And same with the moon, right? We have the howling dogs. Dogs howl at the moon. Maybe, you know, we have the TDM one where we see that the moon is facing us, right? It's a style that's the earlier styles of TDM have that. We have the crustacean in the water. But when we get to Vieville, and let me see what the Tarot of Paris has. They just have, you know, they have an image, an evening, you know, a man. It looks like a man wooing a woman in the evening. So they chose, as for the depiction of the moon, something that happens at night, right? But the Vieville has, you know, someone, a woman with a tool for weaving or spinning in the evening. You know, now the reasons for this, and then we have it. We do have the TDM one, you know, characteristic of the moon facing us in all three of these cards. So that's kind of interesting. Now, why is it a woman, you know, with this type of device? Well, you know, it could be something like, you know, women were, their cycles were governed by the moon, and spinning was maybe seen as women's work. You know, it could be something that cut and dry, that, you know, in those days and in this culture, they would have understood that. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it could have been. It could have been something else. Let me check my notes and see if I wrote anything else. In my notes, I referenced that there might have been an association with spinning having to do with stories of antiquity, of, you know, destiny, you know, like spinning your destiny. So I don't know. I like the other theory I have better. Okay, with the sun, we have the image that we're accustomed to seeing for the sun in TDM. But in the Vieville and in the Flemish decks, we have a gentleman riding on a horse, all three in the same direction, because it seems clear that the Flemish decks followed suit with the Vieville. You know, certainly, you know, the sun is an upbeat card. Obviously, that's an understatement. And, you know, maybe it's, you know, maybe this was a victor in it, similarly to like the chariot, right? You know, he's carrying a banner, which looks celebratory. So maybe it's just like good things happen during the day. I'm not really sure. Obviously, this seems to be the source, one of these anyway, a reference, you know, that Pamela Coleman Smith, obviously her image of the sun deviates from TDM. It doesn't have people in a garden or in front of a bricked wall, right? It's more similar to these. So she was obviously familiar with these, or at least Edward weight was. Let me see if I have anything else in my notes about the sun. No. Because I don't have anything in my notes about the sun. Okay, we're moving right along. Judgment across the board seems to be pretty similar, and a reference to the final judgment. And in fact, these two, the Noblet and the Vieville, seem more similar, although there's variations between them. And the Flemish, who in this one, the de Hautot, has more people, including a skeleton in varying maybe stages of decay. Maybe that's what that signifies. Not everybody died on the same day, right? But they all have the horn, the reawakening, being called to be accounted. And the final card, oh, not the final card, but for these two. Now, in the TDM of Noblet, we have, well, let's start with the Vieville. We clearly have the image of Christ, right? The Christ after he ascended into heaven, which I believe is what was being portrayed in the world card, right? A reference to Christ's ascension. I mean, we have the 4 biblical creatures in the corners. We have, a figure with a scepter of sorts. It really, and he's got a halo in the Vieville, so it seems clear that it was the ascended Christ. But in, the world card of the Noblet, it's possible that the the quality of the craftsmanship, kind of screwed up and made Christ look like a woman, or maybe they just didn't know what they were doing or copying. I don't know, but there does seem that the image in the world card transitioned and became a woman. But I think the Vieville actually understood that it was the risen Christ. And when we get to the Flemish cards, they deviate from the Vieville altogether. Now, maybe that was because they really didn't want, just like they had with the Spanish captain and the Bacchus cards, they just didn't want to have religious imagery, which would suggest that they recognized this image as a religious image, right? That this image was, because we do have the 4 biblical creatures, so it doesn't make sense that it would have been a woman. It makes sense that it would have been Christ, right? So, the drawing or the rendering of Christ, with breasts, just could have been like a lack of skill that was misunderstood as it was copied, by other people, and then it kind of became a woman or a non-specific gendered person. But it seems as though the Flemish really did understand that it had been a religious reference, and they chose to change it altogether to be referencing just the world, right? Being on top of the world. So I hope this video has been interesting to you. And until next time, friends, please do me the honor of a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please give me, please subscribe. And until next time, peace and stay well.